Welcome, everyone, to the teacher behind the high leverage practice, exploring stages of teacher development. Today, we're really lucky to have Dr. Jodi Tangen from North Dakota State University here to offer insight on student retention. Dr. Tangen has a PhD in counseling and counselor education and 10 years of experience teaching in higher education. Additionally, she has 4 years of teaching experience at the K-12 level. In the past year, she has focused her attention on teacher development and the ways that teachers gain mastery of their craft.
So today I'm going to talk just a little bit about the teacher and the development of teachers. And I actually, just to give you a little bit of background information, I became interested in this probably a couple of years ago. We have a counselor education program, and as part of the program, we actually help train doctoral students to become teachers. When I was in my undergrad program, I was training to become a teacher, and I started off as a fifth grade teacher. And so I knew a lot of the strategies on how you work with, especially little kids that won't come out from under tables and that are yelling and screaming and all that. So I felt like I had a good understanding. And then when I went into college, I was like, actually, this is easier, like it's easier to manage behaviors and so forth. But I found out that what I kind of took it for granted that I had gone through all of that development when I was working with little kids, and that I was very well trained in teaching as an undergraduate or in my undergraduate program. So when I started working with doc students, and they would come to me and be like, I don't really know what I'm doing and I'm really scared. And when they went up to teach, they didn't really kind of like work the room and teach people. They kind of like had their presentation and they read from slides, and I was like, well, that's not really teaching. So let's talk about how we develop as a teacher. And so it just became an interest of mine of like, how do we develop as teachers, and how does that process happen, and how can we help people along that process? So that's just a little bit of background information. So we're just going to talk about how teachers develop, and we'll also talk just a little bit about high leverage teaching practices. I will move right into those. So that this is the focus for the conference that we have today, are the high leverage teaching practices. Now, when I first created this, I was like, that's great. I'm going to put all the high leverage teaching practices on a couple different slides. It became so busy and messy that I was like, this is not going to work. So I found some places where they grouped them into various categories. So when you think about the high leverage teaching practices, first of all, we have collaboration. So figuring out how we can collaborate with people, collaborating with outside professionals, collaborating in some cases at the K-12 level with, parents, collaborating with administrators, with different forms of people who work at a school, the psychologist, the counselor, so on and so forth. Another important piece is assessment. So really being able to understand, where are students at any given point in time. In my particular field, a lot of times I teach counseling techniques. So when I'm watching a student work with like a client or a sample client, I'm really watching, okay, something is missing there. I think you have empathy, but you're not able to communicate it to your client. Why is that happening? So I'm assessing this kind of in real time. And so that's part of that high leverage teaching practice. Social and emotional behavioral type things. If you're doing functional behavior assessments, being positive in the classroom, being consistent, those types of things. And then instruction. And there's a multiple ones under instruction that have to do with teaching people like metacognition, scaffolding, so on and so forth. So really the whole reason that I bring this in is because if I listed all of these 22, there are a lot of things to learn how to do as a teacher. And for many people who didn't come from a program that taught you how to teach, it's really complicated. I think for those that they have kind of a natural gift for it, it doesn't seem too problematic, but it can be very complicated, especially when you have multiple things going on at one time. You're trying to assess, now something just happened in the corner and you have to address that. Or like my one cohort, and I was like, wake up, like, come on. I'm doing dances around because I can't get them engaged in some way, shape, or form. So what I did is I kind of took this on as research, and I tried to find as many teacher development models as I could. And so I had a couple criteria that I had. First of all, the model had to be accessible. There were some models that I don't know if it was just passed down from word of mouth or something, but I could not find them online. So if I could find it, through any type of database, searching really old conference abstracts and so forth. I would include it. The model had to describe the development of a teacher and how they went through like various kinds of stages. And then I really was looking at teacher development from a holistic standpoint. So they would have, for example, models on teacher reflexivity or something like that. I didn't want to model on a specific thing. I really wanted to look at the teacher as a whole. So what I found was 13 models that went along with this. So I found 13 models, but first of all, before I kind of synthesize the different stages that go with that, I do want to provide some limitations beforehand. So first of all, one of the things that when we think about development in anything, right? There's the models that can be like, first you're an infant and then you're a toddler and it kind of goes in these stepwise stages. Looking at that can be beneficial, but it can also be a downfall. And sometimes it's helpful to look at things more incrementally. So when I do present these stages, I don't necessarily want you to think of them as rigid, even though they're kind of presented that way. But people can recycle back through different types of stages, and they're a little bit more incremental. The models are very limited on cultural variables, and some of them they were actually a little bit comical. I read some on like created I should have included this, but look, one was created back in the 70s and they talked about like, oh, well, women's development can get impacted because if they have children, then, and you wouldn't usually see that in things written nowadays, but they are very limited in looking at cultural variables. Many of them were dated and a lot of them were for K-12 education. So it'd be interesting to see more higher education and what that might look like. So based on all this, what I did is I took all of these models and I read through all of the stages and all the things, and I tried to synthesize them into stages that seemed similar across all of the models. And so what I really came up with was 4 stages. And so this first one, pre-service. So a couple of different models had a pre-service stage. And this was kind of one of the most like the wonkiest stages because it had a lot of different kinds of contradictions that went with it. So people would be really idealistic. And you can see this if any of you worked with student teachers, like you're really idealistic, like I'm going to go out and change the world. And then pretty soon they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not changing the world at all. I'm actually barely can stand at the end of the day. So there's kind of this idealism and disillusionment, being really excited, but also being really scared, being concerned, but then also not concerned sometimes. And then this one too, they talked a lot about how, especially, and we do this in anything, the first thing we usually do is mimic whoever we are working with. Like I will have doc students mimic my teaching style. And then when they become more comfortable, they become their own selves. And so we see this in pre-service too, kind of like mimicking others and then finding a little bit of a sense of who they are. And also this feeling of insecurity, sometimes feeling confident, like, oh, I did it. I led that class. And other times feeling like, oh my gosh, that was a complete train wreck. I don't know what happened. So this is really that first stage, the pre-service, when you're under the guidance of somebody else. The next stage, which it's interesting, almost all the models called it survival, which if you've ever, this might have been your first year if any of you work in higher ed as a professor. If you've ever worked in K-12, most people will say that first year or first couple of years is very, very difficult. And people are just trying to keep their head above water. And so the models, I did include for all of these a quote from one of the readings to help illuminate the model. But for a lot of these people, they are really just trying to move from one day to the next. Even working into higher ed, you get your new course load. Okay, I'm going to teach this class. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I have to learn all the material to figure out how I'm going to present all the material. Then I have to go in and figure out if I'm going to present it and learn all the personalities and figure out how I'm going to assess this and so forth. So it becomes a really difficult, challenging thing, and usually stay like one step ahead, like you're just a little tiny bit ahead, hopefully. People are described as anxious, feeling vulnerable, lacking confidence, self-conscious. I remember when I taught my first doc class, I'm like, who am I to be sitting here? Very self-conscious. Very rigid. You'll see teachers, especially first year teachers, actually overcorrect on things, become really rigid about rules and things because there's a fear like if I let anything slide, this whole place is it's gonna fall. Like I'm gonna lose control of everything and the kids are gonna be jumping all over the place. So to correct for that, you overcorrect and become really, really rigid. People, when they start teaching, are usually more subject centered. So I remember one of my principals recalls in my first year of teaching, I was teaching a math class. And so I was teaching fifth graders math. And when I got done, I sat down with her and she goes, "Did you realize Chris in the back of the room was throwing up?" And I was like, "No, I did not realize that." And she was like, "Yeah, you got to pay attention to stuff like that." So subject centered, usually if you watch a really, really good teacher, they have this really, my daughter's kindergarten teacher, 30 years of experience as a kindergarten teacher. I went in to help her with centers, and she would pick up on something across the room that was happening before I even knew it. And she was working with a small group of kids in the front. Like, it was amazing the level of like, this is happening over here, and I need to just quietly go over and correct this, but I can keep my focus on what I'm doing and teaching. So really being able to have that like multifaceted attention is very difficult for first year teachers. And so as they kind of fall back on just the subject matter, like if I just teach you this, and then later have kind of the capacity to look up and be like, oh, there are people here. So idealistic, usually coming in thinking, oh, I can do this, like I can change everything. And then later on, realizing some of the challenges that are associated with that. Usually some sense of incompetence, ambivalence about what doing, becoming shocked by the complexity of it and how hard it is when you get in there. Worried about classroom management. That's where you'll see a lot of people overcorrect, even in higher ed. The doc students that I work with, and sometimes adjunct instructors who have done things for the first time, the feedback that we'll get from students is they're too hard. Like they're too hard. Like I just missed one little thing and they just like came down on me. And that's usually just it's a developmental sign, because it's like they're trying so hard, trying to keep everything under control. And so there's a lack of flexibility there. And then reliance on stability. So the next one, stabilization. So all of these I put like, when I looked across all of the models, they had like general years, like what year do you fall into this? I mean, those are just very general. It doesn't work for everybody, but they would say like around 5-ish years, people begin to feel more like stable, like, oh, I kind of have a sense of what I'm doing. And so in that stage, they're feeling more confident. They're like, oh, I can get this. They're more secure, more authentic. And so you'll notice that like teachers really kind of come into their own and they become more themselves. And they figure out, like I remember in the beginning, I was not good at classroom management. And I was trying to do like just like, okay, you have to go to the office because you're not listening. But later on, I found I could use humor, and that usually worked pretty well with students. So you become more authentic in what you're doing, more flexible, confident, self-directed, motivated, committed. But also the other piece of this is with stabilization, a lot of times people become burnt out. And that, I don't remember which model it was that had kind of like this direction where you could, keep growing kind of like anything, or you could get burnt out and you could kind of like stagnate in your growth. And so people will become bored with the subject matter. You hear teachers talk about it all the time, bored with like the same problems happening over and over again with the same types of students. Like that's a sign of burnout. Also challenging authority, like you start to feel more confident and now you're like, okay, now I'm going to start challenging my authority. Sometimes there's that mid-career crisis. And also, like I said before, like this, are you growing or are you kind of just settling in? Like, okay, I can do this for the next 30 years, but I'm not growing much. And the next one, I really love this one. So I called it mastery, all of these model names I came up with, but I called it mastery. And what the age that, or how many years to get there, I put it depends, because I think it really does depend on who this person is and how much they're committed to their own growth, right? And especially if you've kind of come out of burnout or been able to grow through burnout. But these types of people they're very insightful. Like I said about my daughter's kindergarten teacher, I would want to just sit back and watch her, because you could tell that she was, this quote I have here, I'll read it to you. Experts engage in performance in a qualitatively different way than do novices or competent performers. They're more likely like the race car driver or firefighter or fighter pilot who talks of becoming one with his or her machine, or the science teacher who reports that the lesson just moved along so beautifully today that he or she never really had to teach. The experts are not consciously choosing what to attend to and what to do. They're acting effortlessly, fluidly. And in a sense, this is irrational because it is not easily described as deductive or analytic behavior. So really, and I actually saw one that broke it up into like mastery, and this was kind of like an irrational type of functioning. But it's this level of like, and this is what I saw in my daughter's teacher, like the ability to, and they don't even know they're doing it. They're so good at it. Like the ability to walk in and subtly change something or understand, like read the room, like, oh, we aren't quite there. We're not getting it. Or this one in the corner isn't getting it. I'm going to have to figure out what to do here. But being able to do that very effortlessly, it's like you can just walk through it. And if any of you practice anything to mastery, you would probably get a sense of what this is like. So somebody who does really well at chess, they'll be like, it just like I just saw it in my head and I just did it. Or the race car driver, or sports, if you're an athlete, and it's just so intuitive that sometimes it's actually irrational because if something goes awry, you can pivot even beforehand. All the pieces on the side, I think I talked about most of these, very reflective, self-directed, self-accepting, able to handle deep philosophical and contextual factors, also very able to simultaneously focus on the content and the students and themselves in the whole process and how you're all interacting with one another. But then the piece that they have in there is there's still some possibility for burnout in this stage too. And so really making sure that we are working with people and helping them if they are feeling a sense of burnout. So implications. So when I did this, I found this very interesting, and especially when we think about high leverage teaching practices, because most of us aren't probably trained in some of these practices before we go on to teach college. But I always think of like if you are working with somebody who is a new teacher and kind of learning all of these things at once, really understanding, first of all, what is their bandwidth? Like what can they handle at any given point in time? And how can, like when I think about working with doc students, how can I help you focus on one thing right now? And then gradually, as you become more comfortable with that, work on a few more things. So making sure that we understand like how many things people are attending to at once. Provide training in the high level practices, focusing on one improvement at a time, practice patience, and then also observe master teachers and watch their use of these practices. I think of what's his name, Tony Rumney. I don't know how you say his last name, but he really created this idea of deliberate practice, which is he would say that like we all get to a certain point, and a lot of us, like whatever we're working on, we kind of lag unless we start deliberately practicing certain strategies. So in this case, like if you're finding out, hey, you know what, I don't feel like that went over very well. How can I deliberately practice some strategies to help myself improve? Any last comments or questions? Yeah, here, I can bring this to you.
I'm a PhD student in a math program. I will become a teaching assistant next semester. I'm like terrified somehow to become a teacher because I have no clue. I was going to ask you, what would you recommend to a student or someone who will start teaching?
That's a great question. And I think you're not alone, first of all, because I think there are a lot of people that are terrified of that. But I would say if you can find a mentor, I think a mentor is one of the best things, especially somebody who has some experience and who can appreciate and remember how difficult it is in the beginning. So that when you do have like the class that kind of, I mean, we've all had those, the class that just like fell off, like it was just a terrible train wreck. You can go to the mentor and be like, okay, this is what happened. How can I improve next time? And typically that helps. And if you have, like, I think, we always talk about in teaching, like developing your plan so that you can deviate from it as you get more comfortable, but just making sure you're prepared and then you have somebody to go to. Yeah, I think it would be the biggest thing. Anybody else have advice? Breathe, maybe. Yeah.
I think one thing to remember too is you're going to screw up. That's okay. Not the first class I TA'd for, I got comments that were not really good. And it was true. I mean, the thing is they were true. So it wasn't like I could say, oh, well, no, I was like, no, I did those things. You're right. And it wasn't just one person. So I was like, yep, obviously not only did I do those things, they came through. Not that I wanted them to. So keeping that in mind, I think is important for that first time too. Just knowing that you're going to mess up. I still do. And you can improve on it. To that end, one of the questions I wanted to ask too was about learning from master teachers. Can they sometimes not be the best source? Because especially if they don't know what they're doing, right? Because they're so good at it, then are they always the ones that maybe we want to that we were best, especially if we're just starting, the best ones to learn from?
That's actually a really good question. And I would say I haven't seen it in the teaching literature. And if any of you have, please feel free to speak. But in the counseling literature, when we talk about development, they do say they're like, sometimes your best teacher is somebody who's like one step above you. And so because they can break it down a little bit better than somebody who is like so far above that they're like, wait a second. I do think some teachers who are really good, if they have really good skills at sort of like translating their implicit knowledge into more kind of declarative, I think sometimes they can help. But I think you're right. If it is something that's they're so in tune with that they can't even describe, I would agree. Yeah, that's a good point.
So can a teacher be in different stages depending on what class they're teaching?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I would say yes. I would say it's kind of like we talk about this in counselor development too. Like you can be like almost to the point of maybe mastery or stabilization in teaching a specific course or a specific population, like group of students. And then once, like if somebody threw me back in with little kids and I had to teach a math lesson, I would go right back to the beginning again. And I think I might get better faster because of some of that associative learning. But I still think anything that's new, you're going to trip up a little bit. Yeah. And go back. Or when you try something new, I don't know. I was thinking when I try a new lesson and I'm like, oh, that didn't work. Other questions or comments? Well, thank you all for your time today.